During my husband's will reading, my daughter-in-law laughed when the lawyer asked me to sit down, as if a chair in that room was something I no longer deserved. It was such a small sound, barely more than a breath through her perfect smile, but it cut through the quiet office sharper than any insult she could have spoken out loud. I had buried Richard Hayes 7 days earlier. 7 days since I stood beside his grave in my black wool coat, gripping the folded flag from his old army service while the November wind moved through the cemetery maples. 7 days since people hugged me, called me strong, told me Richard would always be with me, then went home to their warm kitchens and ordinary lives. I was still learning how to wake up without hearing him shave in the bathroom or hum old country songs while making coffee. And there I was, sitting in Mr. Bennett's law office, expected to understand numbers, signatures, property lines, and final wishes while half my heart still felt buried under fresh dirt. The room smelled like leather, old paper, and lemon furniture polish. A brass lamp glowed on the corner of the desk. Behind Mr. Bennett, shelves of thick legal books climbed the wall, the kind Richard used to joke were only there to intimidate people who forgot to read the fine print. My son Michael sat to my right, wearing the Navy suit I had bought him for his first real job interview 20 years ago, though I doubted he remembered that. His wife, Lauren, sat beside him with her legs crossed neatly at the ankle, one manicured hand resting on his sleeve like a quiet claim. She wore cream, not black, and diamonds small enough to look tasteful but bright enough to be noticed. My granddaughter Sophie sat near the window, shoulders tense, eyes moving between me and her mother. She gave me a tiny smile when I came in, but Lauren's glance shut it down before it could become anything warm. Mr. Bennett stood when I entered. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "please have a seat." Before I could move, Lauren laughed. Not loudly. Lauren never did anything loudly unless she wanted witnesses to call her passionate instead of cruel. It was a soft little laugh, polished and practiced, followed by the tilt of her head. "Oh," she said, looking at Michael instead of me. "She still thinks she has a seat at this table?" The office went still. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. Michael looked down at his hands. He did not say, "Lauren, stop." He did not say, "That's my mother." He did not even look embarrassed enough to satisfy the small, foolish part of me that still wanted proof my son had a conscience where I was concerned. He just stared at his wedding ring and let the silence do what Lauren's words had started. I could have answered her. I could have reminded her that I had sat at hospital beds, kitchen tables, mortgage offices, school conferences, and business meetings long before she learned our last name. I could have told her that the house she liked to call Richard's legacy had been cleaned by my hands, paid for with my overtime, and warmed by every meal I cooked while he built his company from a rented garage on the edge of Dayton. But grief teaches you the weight of words. Some are too expensive to spend on people who only want to watch you bleed. So I sat down. Slowly, I folded my hands over my black purse and looked at Mr. Bennett. "Please continue," I said. My voice sounded calm, almost distant, like it belonged to a woman watching rain through a window instead of a widow being measured for erasure. Lauren's smile widened, because she thought my quiet meant defeat. She thought Richard's death had made me smaller. She thought the chair beneath me was the last piece of dignity I had left in this family. What she did not know was that Richard had chosen that chair very carefully, and before the morning was over, everyone in that room would understand why. Mr. Bennett lowered his eyes to the folder in front of him, but I noticed the small pause before he opened it. He had known Richard for nearly 30 years. He had handled our first real estate closing, the incorporation papers for Hayes Construction, the purchase agreement for the lake cabin, and every careful update Richard insisted on making after his 65th birthday. He was not a sentimental man, but that morning even his fingers seemed to move more slowly than usual. "Before I begin," he said, "I want to remind everyone that Richard was very specific about the order in which these documents are to be read." Lauren shifted in her chair. It was subtle, but I saw it. A tightening at the corner of her mouth. A glance toward Michael, quick as a match being struck. She had expected a simple reading, maybe a few formal words, then signatures and instructions. She had expected me to sit quietly while the life Richard and I built was divided into neat little piles that could be carried away without my fingerprints on them. For weeks before the funeral, she had been speaking in careful phrases that sounded helpful if you did not listen too closely. "Eleanor, This house must feel overwhelming now. Eleanor, Michael and I only want to make things easier. Eleanor, assisted living communities are not what they used to be. She always said my name like a nurse reading a chart, never like family. The first time she suggested I should consider moving, Richard was still alive, asleep in the recliner with a blanket over his knees after a long cardiology appointment. I remember standing in my own kitchen while Lauren leaned against the granite island, stirring sugar into coffee she had not asked permission to make. She smiled at me with those pale pink lips and said, "You know, when the time comes, it would be selfish to hold on to a 5-bedroom house just because of memories." I had looked at Richard then. His eyes were closed, but one hand had tightened around the edge of the blanket. He had hurt her. I knew he had. At the time, I told myself not to make trouble. Families say uncomfortable things around illness. People get scared. People become practical because tenderness feels too dangerous. That is what I told myself. But sitting in that law office, watching Lauren smooth the sleeve of her cream blazer, I finally understood she had not been scared. She had been rehearsing. The office window looked out over Main Street, where cars moved through the gray morning and a delivery truck idled beside the curb. Ordinary life continued less than 20 feet away. Someone was buying coffee. Someone was mailing a package. Someone was probably complaining about traffic or grocery prices, unaware that inside that room a woman who had spent 43 years being a wife was being quietly tested to see whether she would accept becoming a guest in her own history. Michael cleared his throat. "Can we just get through this?" he asked. His voice had a tired edge, but not the kind that comes from grief. It sounded impatient, as if my sorrow had become an errand running behind schedule. Lauren patted his arm. "Of course, honey," she said, then looked at Mr. Bennett. "We all want to respect Richard's wishes." She said it beautifully. That was Lauren's gift. She could wrap a selfish sentence in silk and hand it to you like a favor. Sophie stared down at her phone, but her thumb was not moving. She was listening. I could feel her listening the way children listen when adults think they are too young to understand the shape of a room. Mr. Bennett opened the folder. The paper made a dry sound. I kept my hands folded. My wedding ring felt loose on my finger, though I had worn it every day since 1981. Across the desk, Lauren looked at me again, and this time her smile was smaller, sharper. She thought the important part of the morning was what Richard had left behind. I already knew better. The important part was what Richard had seen before he left. Mr. Bennett began with the formal language first, the kind of words that make grief feel like a business appointment. Full legal name, date of execution, confirmation of sound mind, witness signatures, county filings. I listened to every syllable, not because I understood all of it, but because Richard had always believed details mattered. He used to say a house did not fall apart because of one bad storm. It fell apart because someone ignored a small leak for too long. That morning, every sentence felt like him pointing to leaks I had pretended not to see. Lauren sat perfectly still through the first few pages, but her confidence returned when Mr. Bennett mentioned personal items. Richard's watch collection would go to Michael. His old fishing rods would go to Sophie. His army medals would remain with me unless I chose otherwise. Lauren breathed out softly, almost amused, as if those things were harmless scraps thrown to keep an old woman quiet. When Mr. Bennett read that Richard's truck would be given to Charles Morgan, his oldest friend, Lauren frowned. "Charles is not family," she said. Mr. Bennett looked over his glasses. Richard considered him family. The sentence settled between us with more force than Lauren expected. Michael rubbed his jaw, uncomfortable, but again he said nothing. I thought of Charles standing beside Richard every summer at the lake cabin, both of them pretending to fix the same loose dockboard for 8 years because it gave them an excuse to drink iced tea and talk about baseball. Charles had visited Richard twice a week during his last month. Michael had visited twice in total. Lauren looked at the papers in front of Mr. Bennett, as if staring hard enough might change the ink. "I just think it is unusual," she said. "A man leaves something valuable to a friend before making sure his own family is taken care of." Mr. Bennett did not answer right away. He turned another page. Richard anticipated that concern. For the first time, Michael lifted his head fully. "What does that mean?" Mr. Bennett read, "My family will be taken care of according to the love, loyalty, and respect they showed when they believed there was nothing to gain." The room changed. Not dramatically. No one shouted. No chair scraped across the floor. But I felt the temperature shift all the same. Sophie looked up from her lap. Lauren's hand froze on Michael's sleeve. My son's face tightened as if he had heard his father's voice inside the sentence and did not like what it was saying. I kept my eyes on the desk, but inside, memories began arranging themselves in a line. Lauren asking for copies of household bills while Richard was recovering from a procedure. Lauren telling Michael that I was too emotional to understand financial planning. Lauren volunteering to drive Richard to appointments, then returning with strange new opinions about selling the lake cabin, consolidating accounts, simplifying ownership. At the time, I had thanked her for helping. I had even felt guilty for being relieved when she took over certain errands. Now those moments looked different, like photographs held up to stronger light. Mr. Bennett continued. The checking accounts were organized. The insurance policies were clear. A charitable donation would be made to the Veterans Center where Richard volunteered every December. Lauren shifted again, impatience breaking through her polished face. She had not come for medals, fishing rods, or donations. She had come for the house on Willow Creek Road, the lake cabin near Indian Lake, and the controlling interest in Hayes Construction Holdings. She had come for the things she believed proved she had finally outranked me. Excuse me, Lauren said, smiling tightly. But perhaps we could move to the major assets. Eleanor has had a difficult week, and dragging this out seems unkind. There it was. My grief used as a tool against me. My pain dressed up as concern. I looked at her then, really looked at her. Not as my son's wife. Not as Sophie's mother. Not as the woman I had tried to welcome for 22 years. I saw the calculation beneath the softness, the hurry beneath the sympathy, the hunger beneath the manners. Mr. Bennett closed the first folder and placed his hand on a second one, thicker than the first. Very well, he said. Richard also anticipated that. Lauren's smile vanished for half a second, and in that half second, I understood something important. She was not afraid I would receive nothing. She was afraid Richard had known exactly what she wanted. Mr. Bennett opened the second folder, and the paper inside was not the thin, ordinary paper of a simple will. It was heavier, cream-colored, marked with tabs and signatures and the quiet weight of preparation. Richard had always been a man who planned 2 steps beyond the problem everyone else could see. When our water heater failed in the middle of January, he had already bought the replacement valve. When Michael broke his arm at 12, Richard had the insurance cards, the route to the hospital, and a change of clothes ready before I found my shoes. People called him steady. I called him safe. Sitting there, with Lauren watching that folder like it was a locked door, I felt the first strange thread of safety since the funeral. Mr. Bennett cleared his throat. This portion concerns the primary residence at 418 Willow Creek Road, the lake cabin in Logan County, and all ownership interests connected to Hayes Construction Holdings. Lauren sat a little straighter. Michael stopped rubbing his jaw. Sophie's eyes moved to me, then back to the lawyer. I did not move. I could hear Richard in my memory, not from one dramatic speech, but from 100 ordinary evenings. His voice at the kitchen table while I balanced receipts. His laugh from the garage while I read permit forms out loud. His tired whisper after our first profitable year when he placed his hand over mine and said, "Ellie, they will put my name on the sign, but you and I both know whose hands kept the lights on." We had started with 1 pickup truck, 2 ladders, and a checking account so thin I used to write the grocery list on the backs of unpaid invoices. Richard did the estimates. I answered the phone. Richard met the clients. I tracked every payment. Richard shook hands at job sites. I called suppliers, chased permits, fixed payroll errors, and stayed up after midnight learning bookkeeping from library books because we could not afford an accountant. When Michael was little, he slept in a playpen beside my desk while I typed bids on a used typewriter that jammed every time I hit the letter R. Later, when the company grew, people began calling Richard the founder. I let them. It made him proud, and I was proud of him. I never needed applause. I thought family remembered what strangers forgot. Lauren had not. To her, I was the woman who made casseroles, sent birthday cards, and wore sensible shoes. She saw silver hair and assumed the story before it was finished. I remembered the first time she toured our home after getting engaged to Michael. She walked through the living room, touching the mantel, the built-in shelves, the carved banister Richard had restored himself. "This place has such potential," she said, as if it had been waiting all those years for her opinion to make it valuable. I smiled then. I wanted my son to be happy. I ignored the way she asked what the property taxes were before asking how long we had lived there. I ignored the way she complimented Richard's business sense, but never asked what I had done during those early years. I ignored too much because peace had become a habit. Mr. Bennet adjusted the page in his hands. Richard included a personal statement before the asset distribution, he said. Lauren gave a short breath. Is that necessary? Mr. Bennet looked at her calmly. He made it necessary. Then he began to read Richard's words, and the room seemed to narrow around them. To my wife, Eleanor, who was never a passenger in my life, but the woman who helped build the road beneath my feet. My throat tightened. I looked down at my hands because I did not want Lauren to see what those words did to me. If anyone sitting in this room believes she was merely cared for by me, then they have not been paying attention. Every house I built carried her sacrifice in its foundation. Every dollar I earned passed first through her discipline. Every good thing attached to my name was steadier because she stood beside me. Michael made a small sound, almost like regret arriving too late. Lauren stared at the folder, her face still but pale beneath her makeup. I thought of all the years I had made myself smaller so no one else would feel accused by my strength. Richard had seen it. He had seen me, and before anyone could divide what we had built, he had made sure his voice entered that room first. Mr. Bennet continued reading Richard's statement, and for a few minutes no one interrupted him. Even Lauren seemed to understand that cutting across a dead man's final words would make her look exactly like the woman she had spent years pretending not to be. I know Eleanor will not ask to be defended, Richard had written. That has always been her flaw and her grace. She will endure discomfort rather than embarrass someone. She will accept less than she earned if she believes it keeps the family peaceful. But I am no longer interested in peace that costs my wife her dignity. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Not long enough to cry, just long enough to breathe. The words felt like Richard's hand finding mine under a table, the way he used to do when Michael was young and family dinners became too loud. Lauren's fingers left Michael's sleeve. I heard the small scrape of her bracelet against the chair arm. This feels inappropriate, she said quietly, but not quietly enough. We came here for legal matters, not a memorial speech. Sophie looked at her mother with an expression I had never seen on that child's face before. Not anger, disappointment. It made her look older than 19. Mr. Bennet placed one palm flat on the page. Mrs. Hayes, Richard's personal statement is incorporated into the estate documents. It explains intent, which may become legally relevant if there is any challenge. Lauren's face tightened at the word challenge. Michael finally spoke. Lauren, let him finish. His voice was low, and though it was not courage, it was the first crack in her control. She turned toward him slowly. I only meant we should be efficient. Efficient. That word had followed me around like a shadow since Richard's diagnosis. Lauren wanted efficient decisions, efficient transitions, efficient conversations about what I could keep and what I should release. She had once stood in my pantry holding a clipboard and suggested I start labeling items for donation because downsizing is easier before grief makes people irrational. Richard had been in the den that day, and I had smiled so hard my jaw ached. After Lauren left, he came into the kitchen and found me standing beside the sink, staring at nothing. He did not ask what she said. He only took the clipboard from the counter, placed it in the trash, and said, "This is still your home, Ellie." I had believed him, but part of me had also believed homes could be taken one room at a time if the people around you agreed to look away. Mr. Bennet turned another page. Richard also attached supporting documentation concerning the formation and growth of Hayes Construction Holdings. He slid a copy across the desk toward Michael, then another toward me. Lauren leaned forward before Michael even touched his. The top page showed an old black and white photocopy of a business license from 1984. Richard's name was typed on the first line. Mine was typed on the second. Eleanor Marie Hayes, administrative partner, financial records officer. I stared at that faded paper as if it had been pulled from a forgotten drawer inside my own chest. I remembered signing it at a county office with cracked linoleum floors while Michael kicked his little sneakers against the legs of a metal chair. I had not thought about that day in years. Back then, titles did not matter. We were just trying to survive. This does not mean ownership, Lauren said quickly. Too quickly. Mr. Bennet nodded. Not by itself. Then he opened a smaller envelope and removed additional pages. But Richard preserved payroll records, tax filings, operating agreements, and several amendments. Eleanor was not merely assisting informally. Her role was documented repeatedly, even after she chose not to draw a salary during lean years. Michael looked at me then, really looked at me, as if he was seeing a younger version of his mother sitting at a desk under a basement light, building the part of his childhood he had mistaken for comfort. Lauren's cheeks colored. "Why has no one mentioned this before?" she asked. I answered before Mr. Bennett could. "Because I never needed to make my marriage a courtroom exhibit." The sentence surprised even me. It was not loud. It did not tremble. It simply landed. Lauren looked away first. Mr. Bennett continued. Richard was concerned that after his passing, Eleanor's contributions would be minimized or dismissed. He was especially concerned by recent conversations about the residence, the cabin, and Mrs. Hayes moving from her home. The room went very quiet. Sophie's phone buzzed once in her lap, but she did not look down. Lauren's eyes moved to Michael. Michael's eyes stayed on the document. I could see him remembering things now. His wife's suggestions. His own silence. My forced smiles at Sunday dinners. The way Richard watched all of us more carefully in those final months. For the first time that morning, Lauren was not looking at the will like a prize. She was looking at it like a mirror. Mr. Bennett took a sip of water before reading the next section, and that small pause gave Lauren just enough room to recover her mask. She sat back, crossed her ankles again, and released a soft laugh that did not belong in that office. "I think we are all getting carried away," she said. "No one is minimizing Eleanor. We are only trying to make responsible choices for the family." There it was again. Responsible. Family. Words polished until they could hide almost anything. I looked at Michael, waiting to see whether he would recognize them. He had heard those same words for months. Responsible choices meant letting Lauren call realtors just to understand the market. Family meant signing paperwork before I had time to ask questions. Practical meant moving me from the home where I knew which stair creaked at midnight and which kitchen window caught the morning light in April. Michael's eyes remained on the page in front of him, but his face had changed. He looked less like a man being inconvenienced and more like a son who had opened a door and found his childhood stored behind it. Mr. Bennett placed another document on the desk. "Richard's distribution instructions are direct," he said. "The residence at 418 Willow Creek Road is left entirely to Eleanor Hayes, with no lien, condition, shared control, or future transfer requirement." Lauren blinked. Once. Twice. "Entirely?" she asked. Mr. Bennett nodded. "Entirely." The words settled over the room like a judge's gavel, quiet but final. I did not smile. Not because I felt no relief, but because relief can be too fragile when it first arrives. I simply placed my palm over the copy in front of me, feeling the smooth paper beneath my fingers. The house was not just walls and rooms. It was Richard's muddy boots by the back door, Michael's pencil marks on the laundry room trim showing his height each birthday, Sophie's crayon drawing still tucked inside my recipe box because she once said our kitchen smelled like pancakes and safety. It was mine before the document said so, but hearing it said aloud gave the truth a spine. Mr. Bennett continued. "The lake cabin in Logan County is also left solely to Eleanor Hayes." Lauren sat forward. "Richard promised Michael that cabin." Michael looked at her sharply. "When?" The question slipped out before he could soften it. Lauren turned to him. "You know we discussed it." "That is not what I asked." His voice was still low, but something in it made Sophie glance up. Lauren's mouth tightened. "Your father wanted you to have memories there with your family." I thought of all the times Lauren had complained about the cabin. Too rustic. Too far from good restaurants. Too many mosquitoes in July. She had never wanted memories. She had wanted lakefront property. Mr. Bennett remained calm. Richard addressed that as well. "Michael and Sophie may use the cabin only with Eleanor's permission and only under terms she chooses. No one else holds a claim to it." Lauren's hand curled around the edge of her purse. For years, she had treated my permission like an outdated formality. Now it had become the lock on a door she expected to walk through. "This is absurd," she said, the words slipping out sharper than she intended. "Michael is his only child." I finally turned toward her. "And I was his wife." She looked at me as if she had forgotten I could speak without apologizing first. Mr. Bennett moved to the final page in that section. Regarding Hayes Construction Holdings, Richard leaves controlling interest to Eleanor Hayes. Michael will retain a minority interest already transferred to him during Richard's lifetime, subject to the conditions of the family trust. Michael drew in a breath. Lauren's face lost color beneath its careful makeup. Controlling interest. Not a keepsake. Not a sympathy gift. Not a chair at the edge of the table. Control. The word changed the air more than any insult ever could. I remembered Richard at our kitchen table 3 months earlier, his glasses low on his nose, asking me where the original operating agreements were kept. I had told him the blue file box in the cedar closet. He had nodded and said only, "Good." I had thought he was organizing. He had been protecting. Lauren looked from Mr. Bennett to Michael, then to me. Her smile tried to return, but it had nowhere to stand. "Eleanor does not even want to run a company," she said. "This will overwhelm her." I folded my hands again, the same way I had at the beginning, but I was not the same woman who had entered the room. "Lauren," I said softly, "I helped build that company before you knew how to spell our name." No one laughed this time. Mr. Bennett did not react to my words, but I saw the faintest softening in his eyes before he returned to the document. He had watched Richard and me grow older across conference tables and closing papers. He knew what my signature looked like when my hand was steady and what it looked like after Richard's diagnosis, when every pen felt heavier than it should. "There is an additional clause," he said. Lauren made a small sound of disbelief. "Another one?" Sophie looked at her mother then, and Lauren pressed her lips together, remembering too late that her daughter was still in the room. Mr. Bennett read, "Any beneficiary who attempts to pressure, mislead, intimidate, isolate, or publicly humiliate my wife in connection with her residence, finances, medical decisions, personal property, or position in this family shall forfeit any discretionary benefit beyond what has already been legally transferred." Michael went completely still. Lauren's eyes widened, then narrowed as if the words had personally offended her. I felt no triumph. Not yet. What I felt was the quiet ache of realizing Richard had been afraid enough to write that sentence. He had not been guessing. He had been watching. Mr. Bennett set the page down and removed another envelope, this one sealed with Richard's familiar block handwriting across the front. "For Eleanor, if needed." My name looked different written by him now, more alive than anything else in that room. "Richard instructed me to open this only if behavior before or during this meeting raised concerns," Mr. Bennett said. Lauren sat up. "That is completely subjective." "Yes," Mr. Bennett replied. "And as the attorney administering the estate, that determination is mine." Michael looked at his wife. Not quickly, not with blind defense. Slowly, as if pieces were beginning to fit in ways he did not want to accept. Mr. Bennett opened the envelope and unfolded a single typed page with a handwritten note attached. He read the typed portion first. Richard had documented dates. Not emotions. Not accusations. Dates. Lauren contacting a realtor in early September to ask about listing Willow Creek Road after an elderly occupant transitions out. Lauren requesting estimates from a senior moving service without my knowledge. Lauren asking Michael to bring me to lunch on a Saturday while she walked through my house with a woman from an estate sale company. My breath caught at that. I remembered that Saturday. Michael had insisted on taking me to a diner 30 miles away, a place we had not visited since he was in high school. I had been touched. I had ordered tomato soup and half a turkey sandwich, thinking my son missed me. He barely spoke during the meal. When I came home, the framed wedding photograph on my dresser was angled differently, and the cedar chest at the foot of my bed was not quite closed. I told myself I was imagining things. Grief had not even arrived yet, but fear had already made me doubt my own eyes. Lauren's voice was tight. Those were preliminary conversations. Responsible families plan ahead. I looked at her purse on the floor, the gold clasp shining under the office lamp, and wondered how many of my belongings she had already assigned prices to in her mind. Mr. Bennett continued. Richard had included copies of emails. Phrases Lauren could not polish now because they were printed in black ink. Once Eleanor accepts the transition, Michael needs to stop letting nostalgia control the decision. The lake cabin would be better managed by our household. Michael put one hand over his mouth. Sophie whispered, "Mom." Just that one word. It carried confusion, shame, and a child's last attempt to find an explanation that did not break something. Lauren turned toward her. "Sophie, this is adult business." Sophie's eyes filled, but her voice stayed clear. "Grandma is an adult too." The sentence was simple, almost childish. That was why it hurt so much. For months, maybe years, Lauren had spoken around me as if age had made me furniture. Sophie had named the truth in 5 words. Mr. Bennet lifted the handwritten note. Richard added this 3 weeks before his passing. His voice lowered. Ellie, if this letter is being read, then I was right to worry. I am sorry I did not stop it sooner. I thought time would soften people. Instead, it revealed them. Do not surrender your home to keep a peace that never protected you. I looked down before anyone could see my face change. The office blurred for 1 heartbeat, then steadied. Richard was gone, but he had not left me undefended. Lauren had walked into that room expecting a widow. What she found was a witness, a paper trail, and a husband's final refusal to let silence bury the truth. Lauren looked at the printed emails as if they had been placed there by a stranger, as if her own words had betrayed her without permission. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing ready. No gentle explanation, no polished laugh, no careful phrase about responsibility or family unity. Only silence, and the uncomfortable truth that silence sometimes speaks louder when it belongs to the person who has spent years controlling the room. Michael lowered the paper slowly. His face had gone gray around the mouth, the way Richards used to when a client lied straight to him across a desk. You walked through Mom's bedroom? He asked. Lauren turned to him, eyes sharp. I was trying to help us plan. You went through her things. He did not raise his voice. That made it worse for her. Lauren looked at Sophie, perhaps expecting loyalty, but Sophie had moved her chair a few inches closer to me. It was such a small movement that no one outside that room would have noticed, but I did. I felt it like a hand reaching across deep water. Lauren saw it too, and something in her expression hardened. This is exactly what she does, Lauren said, pointing one finger toward me without quite looking at me. She sits there quietly, making everyone feel sorry for her, and suddenly I am the villain for trying to keep this family organized. I almost smiled at that word. Organized. My wedding photograph moved. My cedar chest opened. My house measured for sale while my husband was still alive in the next room. All of it reduced to organization. Mr. Bennet folded Richard's handwritten note and placed it gently on the desk in front of me. I did not pick it up yet. I was afraid. If I touched it, the room would disappear and I would be back at our kitchen table, watching Richard write with that careful slant of his, knowing he was leaving me protection because he could not leave me his presence. The discretionary trust provision now applies, Mr. Bennet said. Michael looked at him. What does that mean for me? It was an honest question, and I respected him for not pretending he did not care. Grief does not erase practical consequences. Neither does shame. You retain what has already been transferred to you, Mr. Bennet said. However, any additional distributions from Richard's estate will be held in trust for 24 months. During that time, there must be no attempt by you, your spouse, or any agent acting on your behalf to pressure Eleanor regarding her home, company interest, personal property, medical arrangements, or financial decisions. Lauren let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no humor left in it. So now we are being punished because Richard became paranoid? Michael turned to her fully. Do not call my father paranoid. Those 6 words did what all the legal language had not. They made Lauren understand she was no longer speaking through him. Her face shifted, first surprise, then anger, then something close to panic. Michael, I did everything for our future. Our future, he repeated, and his eyes moved to me. Or the house. Lauren stood so quickly her purse slipped from her lap onto the carpet. Nothing spilled, but the sound was enough to make Sophie flinch. Lauren noticed and softened her voice at once. Honey, do not look at me like that. Your grandmother is not helpless. She never was. That is the point. She has been letting everyone treat her like a saint while she holds all the cards. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then I reached for Richard's note. The paper trembled slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from age, grief, and the effort of remaining composed while the woman who had tried to erase me accused me of surviving too well. I looked at Lauren. I never held all the cards, I said. I held the family together while other people played games with them. Sophie's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Michael closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, he looked like the boy who once came into my room after breaking a neighbor's window, terrified not of punishment, but of disappointing me. Mom, he said quietly, I did not know. I believed that partly, and partly I did not. Not knowing can be innocent the first time. After that, it becomes a choice to stay comfortable. Lauren bent to pick up her purse, her movements stiff and sharp. "This meeting is not over," she said. Mr. Bennet slid one final document across the desk. "For you, it may be." Mr. Bennet's final document was not long, only 2 pages. But Lauren stared at it, as if it were a wall rising between her and everything she had expected to claim. "This is a notice of enforcement," he said. "Based on conduct documented by Richard and confirmed by statements and behavior observed today, all discretionary estate privileges involving Lauren Hayes are suspended. She has no authority, formal or informal, over Eleanor's residence, personal property, company shares, or medical and financial decisions." Lauren's mouth opened, but no words came. For years, words had been her finest tools. She used them to soften insults, rearrange blame, and make cruelty sound like concern. Now the language in front of her was not emotional enough to manipulate. It was clean, legal, final. Michael reached for the notice, read the first page, then the second. His shoulders lowered slowly, as if the weight of understanding had finally become too heavy to keep pretending. "Lauren," he said, "you told me Mom agreed to look at senior communities." Lauren's eyes flashed. She would have, eventually. "That is not the same thing. You were too emotional to make decisions," she snapped, then caught herself and lowered her voice. "Your father was sick. Your mother was overwhelmed. Someone had to think ahead." I looked at her then, not with anger, but with a clarity so calm it almost felt like mercy. "Thinking ahead is stocking the freezer before a storm," I said. "It is making sure prescriptions are filled before a holiday weekend. It is not walking through another woman's bedroom while she is eating lunch with her son." Sophie moved beside me. Her chair touched mine now. A small sound, wood against wood, but it felt like an answer to every dinner where I had sat alone at the far end of my own table. Lauren saw that she had lost her daughter's silence, and perhaps that frightened her more than losing the house. "Sophie, get your coat," she said. Sophie did not move. "I am going home with Grandma for a while." Michael looked at his daughter, then at me. I saw pain on his face, real pain, but I had learned that pain does not automatically become courage. Sometimes it only becomes another thing a mother is expected to comfort. Not that day. Mr. Bennet gathered the papers with careful hands. "The estate instructions are clear. Eleanor will receive certified copies by tomorrow morning. Charles Morgan is waiting downstairs to drive her if she wishes." At the sound of Charles's name, I felt another piece of Richard's planning unfold. Even my ride home had been protected from the possibility of sitting in a car with people who had just been exposed. Lauren gave a bitter little smile. "Of course, Richard arranged everything." I stood then, slowly, the same way I had sat down. My knees ached, and my black coat felt heavy over my shoulders, but I stood without reaching for the desk. "No," I said. "Richard protected what we arranged together." Michael stood too. "Mom, please. I need to explain." I turned to him, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, roots and dirt still attached, proud because he thought weeds became flowers if given with love. I loved that boy. I still loved the man in front of me. But love was no longer going to make me available for disrespect. "You laugh with your silence, Michael," I said. That hurt more than her words. His face crumpled slightly, but I did not stay to repair it. Some lessons have to echo in an empty room before they become real. Sophie picked up my purse before I could reach for it, then offered me Richard's note. I tucked it against my chest. We walked out together, past Lauren standing rigid beside the chair she had believed would be mine in defeat. Downstairs, Charles waited in the lobby, gray-haired and solemn, holding his old brown hat in both hands. When he saw me, he did not ask what happened. Good friends know when questions are only another burden. He simply opened his coat pocket and handed me a small envelope. Inside was the spare key to the lake cabin and one last note in Richard's handwriting. "Ellie, go somewhere peaceful first. Then decide who deserves a place in your life." Outside, the November air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but for the first time in a week, I could breathe all the way in. Sophie slipped her arm through mine. Behind us, the law office door closed. I did not look back. Lauren had laughed when I was offered a chair, believing I had already lost my place. But by the time I stood up, everyone in that room knew the truth. The seat had never been hers to give me.